Hey, Anita.
Hey, Karen.
How's it
You ready to
going?
do the podcast?
I am ready. And today we are going to be welcoming Wendy Villa and Heidi Beirich, co-founders of Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. And I am super excited to have a
Yes, me too.
conversation about Project
Yeah.
2025. So let's do this.
Let's do it.
Blue wave, we rise to save the day. Only me, only you can let our hearts sail away on a blue wave.
Today, Anita and I are happy to welcome co-founders of Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. They first came to our attention when we were gathering information about Project 2025 and found that they do an excellent job of breaking down the 920-page Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, put out by the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. Heidi and Wendy, welcome to TruBlu Politics, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
So, your website, globalextremism.org, is an excellent resource for not only learning about the domestic threat of right-wing Christian nationalist extremism, but also draws some critical lines to the extremist movement and Christian national threat globally as well. Can you each give us some background about you both and the how, the why, and when you realized the need for your organization?
Sure.
I'll go first.
Okay.
I see Wendy pointing at me. So we started the Global Project in 2020. Wendy and I have for years been tracking far-right extremism. We both worked at the Southern Poverty Law Center for a long, long time, tackling this issue domestically. And frankly, over the years that we were there, we kept seeing that, you have to look at far-right extremism through. You can't have borders, right? It's a transnational movement. White supremacists see themselves as brothers in arms with white people in other places. They don't think of themselves as Americans or Germans and so on. And nobody was really looking at that phenomenon, which had been producing a lot of terrorism and hate of various forms. And so we thought we're going to fill this gap. We're going to look at that, but we're also going to look at how American organizations export hate abroad and continue to keep our eye on what's happening here in the United States, how this all fits together. So that was the thinking, and we launched in the middle of the pandemic, which was maybe a little crazy, but it all worked out just fine. And so we've been up and running for about 4 years now, and we're tracking these movements, these hate movements, and as you mentioned, domestically working on things like Project 2025 and threats to our democracy. I don't know, Wendy, you want to add something?
I think that you covered it. As I can tell you that even though we suspected or had a good idea of what we were going to be addressing when we started Global Project, it has been, it's even more than we ever imagined, particularly in these last few years. I mean, as y'all have pointed out, it's this like with Project 2025, this is not just an American endeavor. This is a coordinated effort from a number of far-right actors in a number of countries. And so that has been a little disheartening, but it actually makes a lot of sense and helps us address the issue.
Yeah. Well, I think, the important thing is identifying it. And I know that, there were a lot of people here kind of scratching their heads at Steve Bannon kind of running all over the globe. And
yeah, he was in Italy and Hungary.
Yeah,
that type of thing.
And then a few years ago, I can't remember how long, but, Tucker Carlson going to Hungary and meeting with Viktor Orban. And then more recently.
CPAC was in Hungary. CPAC they had in Hungary.
CPAC,
Remember
yes,
last
they
year?
had the CPAC in Hungary, and we're all like, "What the heck is going on?" And that was kind of, I don't
Mhm.
know about Anita, but for me, that was kind of like, "What the
Oh, it was
hell?"
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
We knew something was going on. Who do you think the main culprits? I mean, where does this all lead? Is it Russia? Is it Hungary? I mean, where did they kind of, meet? How does this come about between these different actors? Like you see Putin involved in a lot of this, his hands are involved, Orban, Trump, that guy that from what was his name? Brazil,
oh yeah,
that they ousted,
Bolsonaro's.
Bolsonaro.
Mhm.
Well,
Bolsonaro.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that it is a kind of a strange phenomenon that these Trump-like figures have popped up in so many places. And now organizations that only cared about the United States, like CPAC, I mean, that thing's been around for decades.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
has branches in South Korea, Japan, Australia, Brazil. In
Mexico.
fact, Bolsonaro's son is the organizer of CPAC Brazil,
Wow.
Hungary, and obviously here in the US. And this past week, while CPAC was held in DC, they had people from the far right from all over the world. So these people are stitching themselves together,
Mhm.
and they've got a vision for society that's completely opposed to multiracial democracies, diverse democracy.
Mhm.
Orban, Hungary's not a democracy anymore. The EU itself calls it electoral autocracy. That's a quote.
Wow.
And that's the direction that they want to take us. They want to take us away from something that's very good and towards something that's very, very bad.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Do you think this has happened like in the past? Is there something, about right now? Is it like repeating itself? Like when we saw back in the 1930s and 1920s in Italy and in Germany? Or is this just like a new phenomenon?
I wouldn't say it's an exact repeat, and I also wouldn't say that it's new.
Mhm.
It's like variations on a theme. But we are seeing the kind of language that we're hearing out of our political figures across the world, the kind of laws that are getting put in place, or the policy initiatives that are being offered all over the world are very similar to what we experienced in the 30s. Because the first thing you do is you begin to demonize and dehumanize people.
Mhm.
And that's
Right.
where you start. And so obviously the LGBTQ community is under huge risk right now. And that is globally.
Mhm.
We in the United States, we have immigrants at the border, at our southern border, and in Europe, they very afraid of the migrants from North Africa and the Middle East. And so
Right.
that it begins with those people are not real people.
Mhm.
And so that's what, of course, what they did with Jews and gay people in the 30s and Roma and all kinds of folks and that's where you start.
Mhm.
Eddie, you want to add to
Yeah,
that?
I mean, that's the process, right? You demonize certain populations and then you make people afraid of them,
Mhm.
right? So that's why all this talk about how, Trump said immigrants are poisoning our blood, which
Yeah.
literally that's a Nazi phrase. I mean,
Yes.
that is a
Mhm.
direct parallel to the 30s.
Mhm.
Or they're all criminals or deviants. The LGBTQ population is destroying our culture, the family, etc.
Mhm.
That's how you start these things. Orban's path to his autocratic situation was to start with migrants when the migrant crisis happened when the war broke out
Syria.
in Syria.
Mhm.
Exactly. He
Yeah.
started there, then he leapt to demonizing LGBTQ people, then he went after women and women's rights. So
Mhm.
this is the path that you take. And you make your supporters afraid of these people,
Mhm.
make them, essentially other them. They don't belong here. And that's how you build your base.
Mhm.
And that tactic is no different than the 1930s, although the circumstances may be different.
Mhm.
I will say that it's interesting that you brought up the idea of the 30s as transnational, because of course it was a transnational far right movement.
Mhm.
Germany's Nazis had their own flavor compared to
Mhm.
Mussolini's
Right.
fascists, and so on, and Franco and
Spain.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and Japan, right? But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, they were all allied behind this terrible nationalism and demonization.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's what we're getting right now.
Well, and do you think that the difference between the 1930s and then now is we have one of the two major political parties in this country that seem to be completely
Aiding and abetting
coalescing
it.
and
Yeah.
aiding and abetting and pushing us to this, and that we have members of Congress, like, and a lot of members of Congress that are aligned with this, Christian nationalist viewpoint and kind of pro Putin.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with
Yeah,
you at
Yeah,
all.
but do you
We
think
did
do
have
you
some
think
of that.
that's
We did have some of
think
that
that's
back then,
the
though.
case. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the case. There's there's some, gosh, I hate to use a word like nuance on the current situation, but there is.
Mhm,
What you see is that it's the extreme elements of
mhm.
the party. Although at this point, since so many are going along with it, then you have to wear, what
Mhm.
you're for a
Well,
second.
it doesn't. We did have some of that in the 30s. I mean, Rachel Maddow did a whole series on that, a podcast,
Right,
and
ultra.
yeah,
Yeah.
Ultra, and she
Mhm,
Yeah.
talked about that. So we did have some of that. There were senators, there were congressmen that were
Oh yeah,
aligned with Nazi Germany,
but it
yes,
wasn't
they
but
right.
but
absolutely.
it wasn't. I mean, everyone wasn't like. You have some senators and some Congress who are just like they're not really aligned with them, but they're allowing them to. They're just not gonna. They're not gonna stand up to them. They're
That's the
complicit.
problem. That is the problem right
Yeah.
there. It is, I mean, obviously, extreme far right political leaders are a tremendous problem,
Mhm,
especially when they manage to be have the loudest voice and they're actually a minority of a minority, but somehow they're the ones that everybody is listening to.
mhm.
Hmm.
But and Heidi and I have written about this at some point, you've got to pick a side.
Right.
You've
I
got to
know.
see who, are you a person who can have reasonable disagreements on various issues, but still firmly stand up for basically just what's right.
Yeah,
You
for
know,
and
Well, it
democracy.
seems,
yeah.
yeah, but it seems like Republicans have really kind of left democracy a long time ago. That's what I mean. We talked about this, how like since the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and then later on, I mean, they were okay with democracy as long as we were 85% white, and they were still winning in landslides like Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. But then when Barack Obama came along, that's when they freaked out. I don't think they have any kind of loyalty to democracy. And
Well,
so it's easier for them to kind of turn their back on it and just,
It's
they
more of
don't
a
seem to have any
theory.
loyalty to us, to this country.
They want an electoral autocracy just like Hungary.
Yes.
well, I mean,
Yeah.
the polling now shows that more than half of Republicans self-identify as Christian nationalists.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If you're self-identifying as a Christian nationalist, you don't support democracy,
Right.
right? Because it's a religious privilege over a particular kind of religion's privilege over everything
Right.
else.
Mhm.
And that's basically why Wendy and I say that Project 2025 is a Christian nationalist project
Right.
to move us away from democracy. And as in particular, the idea of like real civil and human rights, right? That's what they want to erode first. Some populations are just going to get thrown under the bus and not be protected to favor their particular Christian ideal and
Mhm.
and those adherents. The other thing is the Republican Party's got more than half of self-identified Republicans believe in the Great Replacement conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Right.
They may not understand that's white supremacist, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty scary. And look, I think what Anita was saying is right. This Republican Party right now
Mhm.
is so much more radical than just a few years ago, right? Just
Hmm.
than the George W. Bush era. And it's a bit shocking.
Mhm.
And I do think the demographics are what's driving it. This
Mhm.
fear of loss of sort of white superiority, dominance in the culture, dominance over the society. And that's why they want to start stripping
What
people's rights.
what do they say that they think equality is oppression?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yes, and the women's rights their version of events, if you give rights to trans people, then you're trampling on women's rights.
Yes.
And that's
Well,
it's
they
so it's
say that they're using that. I'm
Of
not sure
course.
that they really
Yeah,
believe
but
it.
that
Yeah.
it's effective though. That's the problem.
do you hit on something, Anita? Because it's very difficult to tell with some of these folks how deeply they believe some stuff. There are
Mhm.
some that believe it down to their core,
Yep.
and they are
Yes.
not going to change, and they are going to be relentless, and they will 100% never back down.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But then certainly there's a faction, certainly of the Republican Party. I mean, just like in any political party, you say, you might focus on something that is going to appeal to your base.
Mhm.
But I think, and I know that it's naive, but I just want to hope some of these folks that have allowed their colleagues to use words like invasion and
Mhm.
disease and filth, like we heard out of the Oklahoma, or a destruction of these very, like we said in the beginning, dehumanizing and violence inspiring rhetoric.
Mhm.
I don't think they're gonna stand up to it until they lose, until they actually, if
You
they
may
see
be
there's a
right.
political
You may
cost.
be right,
Well-
but I think that we're going to need them to stand up if we're going to start turning this thing around.
Yeah, and I wonder too, and this is just, the Republican Party, the Republican base that we have today too, it's diminished significantly numbers wise. When you see these never Trumpers and, there has been an exodus from the Republican Party. So then
Yeah.
I just wonder, it's like, what is it about this group of people that these Republicans that are still hanging in there, and they know that they hate Trump, that all the behind closed doors conversations that we hear, like Claire McCaskill talk about and things like that, and yet they don't
They
stand.
hate
They
him, but
don't
they love what
stand
he-
up. They don't. They refuse to stand up. So what is it? What do you think it is that is keeping them from actually standing up against this? Actually, like a very pretty significant minority group in this country.
Well, it's because that significant minority has the ability to completely torpedo their campaigns and their reelections.
Yes, it's
Mhm.
political. They're
And-
just
and
afraid of
it-
their base. Yeah.
I think that that's one of the reasons. I think that there is also a significant sector on the far right, and Heidi and I make it a point not to just call people conservative, because conservative is completely different in our view than what we're talking
Right.
about.
Mhm.
We're talking about the extreme elements.
Mhm.
But I think that there is a significant number or segment that would like to carry this same message, but wish that it was somebody other than Trump. And then I think there's probably about a similar size segment
Mhm.
who says we are this is going to end up completely destroying our party, because at some point people are going to not stand for this, especially when you so obviously take away not only a woman's bodily autonomy, but they're talking about things like contraception,
Mhm.
talking about divorce.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're talking about, next we'll have to get the man's permission to have a credit card again,
Yeah.
and that only stopped in the 70s.
Right.
So, they're not looking that far back
Mhm.
for how they wish that it could be.
I think
Well-
we're all old enough to remember when our mothers got their first checking account or credit card.
Yeah.
I remember that. Like, I have a vivid recollection of that. I was like in 3rd grade or something, and my mom was so excited she had her own money. Finally,
On the right, you'll see that what they call trads, those are traditional wives, and it's a big thing.
Wow.
They're trying to go back to that. There is a movement to go back to that. I mean, they're
Well-
going to find out it's not feasible in our economy anymore. But yeah, that's what you find over there on the right. These people that think that we should go back to where women stayed home and raised the kids and, couldn't get a credit card in their name.
The power of nostalgia and romanticization of the past on the right never
Yeah.
ceases to astound me.
I know.
Every
They
single
didn't live through it, though. Yeah.
every single part of the far right that I've ever studied had these glorious visions of the past that don't accord at all with reality. And it's kind of amazing, actually, what what we're talking about here just ended a few decades ago, right? Like in
Yes.
my lifetime. So
Yeah.
come on.
I know.
That's true. But
And
most of these people don't remember it. And maybe it was their mother, like Karen and I, remember our mother getting their first credit card. I remember that too. But they don't know the pain that women felt. The, mother's little helper. They, that just having to live that life
Well,
and not have any kind of
it was a lack of power.
dreams.
And too, like, we know that they, the economy, come on. I mean, in an autocracy, who cares about the economy, right? They can do whatever the hell they want, and if they take away women's rights and, take away their autonomy over their economy, then, who cares?
Our economy will be crap, and they don't probably.
They don't care. I mean, if we're an autocracy, how much do they really care as long as they have theirs, right?
Yeah.
Well,
That's the way it is in Saudi Arabia.
talk about foolish.
Yeah.
I know.
Because
Yeah.
you will have no power or ability to achieve anything that you want to achieve because you'll have no voice. And
Yeah.
it's kind of weird that you would want to write your power away, right? Just give it up.
Yeah.
For what?
Well, because you can hurt, gay people and trans people and women and,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and because people never think it's going to happen to them.
yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes.
That's
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
They always-
I think I was gonna say, I think it was it on Stephanie? So we are regular listeners and viewers of Stephanie Miller, and she's on Free Speech TV. But anyway, somebody was talking about what was the main character in Handmaid's Tale, and they were talking about how she was like one of the leaders in the movement, and then as soon as it all came to fruition, and she wanted to take a leadership role, she lost a finger.
Oh yeah, the wife of what was her name? I can't remember her name, but yeah.
And she had to watch while her husband
Mm-hmm.
tried to impregnate somebody else. I mean,
It was gross.
It doesn't. I mean, there isn't such a thing as going this far and no farther, right? It always keeps going.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that people can't imagine, that we are going to find ourselves in an autocracy or even an electoral autocracy, however you want to say it. Because in the United States, there is a core belief in the strength of our democracy and our institutions. And so, like I was telling you can't imagine that they're going to fall. You can't imagine that somebody is going to do every single thing they can to create a situation to strip people of their rights. They think, it's
who can't believe it? African Americans. They can believe it. Black people, because really we've only been a democracy since the 60s, since the 64 and 65 Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act, when those people were allowed to actually participate in democracy.
You know who else believes it? Germans, Austrians.
Yep. Oh, my friend from Austria, she told me that it could happen here. And I remember my husband saying, oh, no, that's not true. And I was like, I don't know.
Unfortunately, this naivete about how quickly a democracy can collapse that we have here in the US, and that I think we've all, I certainly didn't think 4 or 5 years ago we could be on this train, right? This is shocking. But it is really close. And I wish Americans would wake up to that fact. And they're not going to like it when they're living in a Viktor Orban type, Hungarian situation.
Yeah.
And, Wendy and I have good friends in Hungary. It was shocking for them to see the beginnings of a real democracy right after the fall of the wall in Hungary, a couple decades of that just backslide in in a few years.
Yeah, no, and I know that when we were speaking with you, Wendy, yesterday, you had mentioned that we shouldn't be calling it Trumpism. We should be referring to it as Orbanism. And I don't know if you guys want to touch on that a little bit.
Expand
and
on
then
that. Yeah.
what I'd like to too, if you like, what kind of conversations you're having with your family and friends about Project 2025 specifically, because the whole reason we started this podcast was because we were having conversations, and then we thought, the mainstream media is not doing their jobs as far as, conveying the real threat. And only just a couple I've seen talking specifically about Project 2025. I know Nicole Wallace has started this, was it American Autocracy segment, like one of her hours she devotes to that. But she hasn't mentioned Project 2025. And it's right there. So I'm not sure why she's not really talking about that. But I guess if you could speak to why we should
And
be
how do you
talking about it as
how do you talk
urbanism.
to other people about it without sounding crazy, like you're being hyperbolic?
Yeah, like what kind of
That's hard.
conversations are you having?
Yeah.
Like let's have like the Cliff's notes or the like Project 2025 for dummies, so that we can kind of like bring it down and kind of deliver it in a package that scares the shit out of people, but also
You still want a path to overcome it, right?
yes.
There is a path.
Right.
Yes.
How do you want to do? You want to do the
Yeah, no, I
30-second version of Project 2025,
Well,
the 900 document?
Well, something that we could kind of tell other people without, like I
Yeah.
said, sounding crazy or
Yeah.
sounding like we're hysterical.
So
or,
we're like
know.
your girlfriends at the coffee shop, and you're like, hey, have you guys heard about Project
My
2025?
girlfriend, I was just with them last night, and they don't want to hear about Project.
No.
Yeah, they don't. I know. You can't approach them like that. I think you have to
So
kinda-
we're your girlfriends who were really curious about what you ladies are doing.
well, you do have to be careful about the hyperbole, because honestly, if you read some sections of Project 2025, it is just so absolutely shocking and crazy that you can't
Yeah.
believe they put it down on paper. So the first thing I always say to people is, you can read this yourself. I am not making this up. It is on paper. It is backed by over 100 conservative organizations, some of the biggest in the country, like the Heritage Foundation, well-known, long established. And it lays out piece by piece how they are going to get rid of the civil service and put partisans in there, that the Department of Justice is going to be politicized. There'll be no independence for it or the FBI, and it will be used to go after people who oppose whoever the next conservative president is. On top of that, LGBTQ people are going to be eradicated from any protections from the federal government. Abortion will be banned all across the land, and we don't know exactly where we're going to end up with contraception and some of these other things. That's what I try to tell people. Like, these are simple things, and if you don't believe me, you can just go to their website and read about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then usually what I'll bring up is, look at some of the people behind this.
Mm-hmm.
There are groups that have spent decades demonizing immigrants, decades demonizing the LGBTQ population, women's bodily autonomy. And the thing is filled with election deniers, tons of election deniers going back to 2020. So these are some radical people, and you should have a look.
Mm-hmm.
And, I do think once people look at this, they realize there's something very, very wrong. Actually, the one thing we have going for ourselves in this situation is they actually wrote this stuff down, which means we have something to point to, right? It's not us guessing what their plans are. They have happily announced all this crazy stuff. So we could just show people right where it is.
Yep.
Well, they kind of say it out loud at CPAC too.
Oh my God, yeah.
Well, I mean, the fact is that a fair number of initiatives within Project 2025 have either been introduced or already adopted, at state level, because they're coming at it from both sides. Because this 100 or more than 100 organizations, I don't know exactly how many, but a lot of them work at the state level. And like if you're in a state like mine, Alabama.
Or mine, Texas.
Or Texas, right? Which I think, Alabama and Texas are ground zero right now, because not just because of some of the laws that are being passed in our states, which are horrifically anti-democratic, but also because the court cases are coming out of them.
Right.
Yeah.
And another thing about Project 2025 is it's not just about the rights of women. It's not gender rights. They want to eliminate the endangered species list. Like I always bring that up because that's something that everybody knows what it is.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows why we have it
Mhm.
and the importance of having it, and they want to eliminate it. So, and they also want to eliminate the ability of different agencies like the EPA
I was going to say environmental stuff. They
Yeah.
just,
to make rules so that they could just do whatever they want
Mhm.
within the no preservation of forest,
regulations.
wildlife, or and so I mean honestly, when you it can depend on who you're talking to
Mhm.
because there's something for everyone.
Yeah.
in Project
Yeah. Just
25.
to offend it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone.
We couldn't do this without our loyal listeners and love hearing from you, so please give us some stars and a review if you are so inclined. TruBlu Politics is sponsored by our wonderful TruBlu crew of listeners and our supporters on Patreon. As a small startup podcast, our Patreon members help us pay the bills to keep our podcast running and also allow us to keep investing in equipment upgrades for even better quality content in the future. When you sign up as a member at even just $5, you instantly unlock our private TruBlu pod chat and full episodes a day earlier than everyone else without ads in the middle. Upwards from there, we've made even more perks available, like having your name shouted out at the end of our show and a personal Zoom call with me and Anita to discuss ways to overthrow the GOP. If you would like to become a subscriber at any level, including our newly added $1 level, go to patreon.com/TruBluPoliticsPodcast. That's patreon.com/TruBlu Politics Podcast. And as always, thanks for listening. This episode of TruBlu Politics is brought to you by Night Sky Woodworks, featuring gorgeous products like cutting boards, cheese and charcuterie boards, and beautiful tea light holders, all finely handcrafted in their Chicago, Illinois wood shop, all of which have eye-catching designs and make the perfect complementary piece for any kitchen or living room. If you use code TruBlu, that's TruBlu at checkout on their Etsy shop, you get 10% off any order, which is a pretty great deal if you ask me. So go check out their in-stock designs today or message your custom order request on their Etsy shop today by visiting etsy.com/shop/nightskywoodworks. That is etsy.com/shop/NITESKYE Woodworks, and use code TruBlu at checkout for 10% off. So yes, I love the idea of like, here, you can read for yourself, okay? But now I'm excited, and this is why I'm excited to have you on with your organization, globalextremism.org. People can go to your website and there's a bunch of like amazing resources and links to go to. And one of the things that jumped out at me was your focus in the area of tech, like with the tech executives and kind of like, throwing in some regulations or kind of figuring out how, because we have these reports that are coming out that, for example, with the Gaza situation, that I read an article, Iran, Russia, and where else? And China are actually micro-targeting again the hashtags Gaza or Free Palestine in order to divide the left.
Yep.
In the lead up to the 2024. So so if you could speak a little bit too about what you think as far as like the these tech companies, what their role is and what they need to do.
Well, I mean, we just know this is already ramped up. You're giving an example. We already know Russian propaganda is once again coming in just like it did in 2016 and 2020 to mess with, increase polarization. People sometimes forget, but Russian propaganda was so effective back in the first Trump presidency that it led people
Yeah.
to actually hold protests in
Yeah.
front of mosques. There was no person behind it, right? So these
Yeah.
anti-Muslim protests. And so we're getting flooded by that. Most of the big tech companies have reduced the size of their election integrity teams since 2020. That's a tragedy. And just think about it. Those are the teams that ultimately did
Yeah.
not take down the information that led to January 6th, right? So we're in a very weakened position.
Yeah, and Elon Musk is running Twitter, now X. So
and
that's
he's lowered the bar for everybody. Elon, by
Mhm.
just abandoning any kind of online safety issues and reducing online harms, has just made everybody else feel like, well, I can
Right.
throw my arms up in the air and not do anything about these issues too.
well, he's
And
actually
that's
worse than that. Because he has retweeted Russian propaganda. I mean, he's retweeted these crazy, like when Nancy Pelosi's husband was bashed on the head. He was like, retweeting these conspiracies about it. I mean, this guy is actively working against democracy.
yeah, he's retweeted great replacement stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a bit of a super
Yes.
spreader there of hate and extremism now, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he's very. I think he's pro-white.
And
He's a white supremacist. I mean,
well, he's certainly turned
Oh.
Twitter into a
yeah,
one of the
and
larger
he
hate sites
has
on the
got
web,
government
which is a
contracts, right, with
tragedy.
that SpaceX
Yeah.
program. What? Yeah, it's just
he
Yeah.
turned off the satellite stuff for Ukraine at one point. I mean,
Mhm.
it's really scary how much power that guy has.
Yes, it is. And it's scary. I mean, this is another podcast topic, but how much
Yeah.
billionaires have in
Yeah.
Mm.
in
Mhm.
the role of either destroying or supporting democracy too. That's
Well, we should
another one.
try to talk about something more positive, I guess, to end
Okay.
this. But I was thinking about,
Mhm.
how we do have the power here. We cannot rely on this, the courts or anything else. We have to, get the message out. And you were
Mhm.
talking about how we need to break it down, like the Project 2025 stuff, to kind of, to individualize it, right? So that people, so like if it's environmental, and you talked about the Endangered Species Act or things like that, clean air, clean water, whatever works. Okay, when you're talking, depending on who you're talking to, those kind of
Mhm.
things, those things that we can actually
Mhm.
do to try to reach out to people and get the
Yeah.
message out, because we do have the power here. We can change this. We still have an election
Well,
coming up,
I think
but
the
we have
key
to get the
takeaway
message out.
for me, for
Well,
sure,
I,
this week with the Supreme Court doing what they did, in regards to hearing the immunity case, is it basically, and Anita and I have talked about it. It's like, and I don't know about you ladies, but I'm not relying on the courts. Okay, the courts have never been particularly fair to women, minorities, and so I personally wasn't like, people would ask me, well, so do you think he's going to get convicted, before the election? Do you think and I'm like, I don't care. We
Yeah,
need
I
to
didn't care
focus
about
on
that.
what we
Yeah.
can do, what we can actually change, what we have control over, and that is getting out and voting, right?
and I think if more people knew about sort of
Mhm.
what conservatives are really talking about here, understood the efforts to undermine democracy. Like, in other words, all different kinds of organizations, environmental,
Mhm.
ACLU, people who care about
Yep.
extremism, get out the vote,
Medicare, Social
folks,
Security, really,
all
those
that.
type of things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if all those kinds of people understood what was at stake and how much this would change their lives, I think it would propel people to vote. It would propel them to want to make
That's right.
sure that these things are protected, our democracy is protected. And I think you're right. I mean, I think that it's a little
Mhm.
naive to think that our institutions are gonna hold. And the other thing about this is if we have, you know, this is gonna be a different world if a
Mhm.
conservative is ultimately elected because they've learned a lot from the past. So we all have to be cognizant, sort of around that as well. But I do think we can build power from anybody who cares about democracy, and that can also include the movable middle
Right.
and Republicans who believe in those things as well. And,
And
and
people care about women's rights, like abortion. The overturning of Roe v. Wade has really, a lot of women are participating, because I mean we've seen all these cases where they've, you know, abortion rights have been upheld, in states like Ohio and Kansas. So that has energized a lot of women, I think, the threats to our bodily autonomy.
I think that has been a tremendous motivator.
Yeah.
Because that is quite literally taking away a right that women had for the last 50 years. But I also think that this IVF case here in Alabama was a catalyst.
Oh, absolutely.
It was
well, they're trying to walk it back too, but they can't.
They can't. It was the very last thing that the Republicans wanted to be dealing with. And so now what you have, and it's the product. Of course, Alabama has a wildly conservative at best. And when you talk about Tom Parker, they're extreme.
Oh yeah, that guy.
I don't even know how to just explain, because Heidi and I have been dealing with Tom Parker for it feels like our whole lives, because he and Roy Moore were together and they started Alabama Policy Institute. But anyway, but here's the thing: as wacky as some of their decisions are, one of the reasons that we got to where we are is because of the way these abortion bills, these sanctity of life bills are written. They are so broad, and they were purposely written that way to keep to basically give women no choice whatsoever, or if there is a sliver of choice, that it's going to be so narrow. And so then you get something like that. Well, then you get a court, because there were some dissents, right, on the decision. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you've given us this law, and according to this law, this is how we're going to have to interpret it. And you're going to see that kind of stuff across the country.
Oh yeah, because you cannot say life begins at conception, because the result of that will be things like banning IVF. So there's no way they can back out of it. They have to, if they believe life begins at conception, well then then the result of that would be a ban on IVF.
Implantation, right? If it's in a woman's uterus. Well, these are splitting a lot of hairs to get back to where you want to be. But there are a lot, even when you add the IVF situation to the women who were already questioning, because there's a lot of women who are anti-abortion, and that's fine. But now you're saying you can't have IVF. I was with someone last night who's extremely conservative, and their family had, benefited and had the great joy of children coming from IVF. And it's like, well, you can't take this away. And so and so now this issue is going even a little deeper than a woman who might be questioning her position or have a anti-abortion stance.
I think another thing is, when you tell people that 65,000 women in the United States had to give birth to the rapist baby, 26,000 of them here in Texas. A 13-year-old girl in Mississippi had to give birth to a rapist baby because she couldn't afford to go out of state to get an abortion. These kind of stories, 65,000 women. Greg Abbott said, don't worry, ladies, I'm going to get rid of rape. So, of course, 26,000 women ended up because he told, it ended up having to give birth to the rapist baby. I just think that those kind of statistics and those kind of real stories,
and talk about real stories too.
Really alarming.
We've talked about it with the exceptions. So even when and I think that we have to warn people too, that even when they say we're going to do a national, like a 16-week national ban, like Donald Trump, because it's a nice, round number, and but what that means is the Kate Cox story, she was 22 weeks. We have the young lady, African-American woman in Ohio, that they were going to criminally prosecute for having a miscarriage, saying that she was mishandling a corpse. And then you have that conservative Christian couple, I believe they were from South Carolina. This is the three stories. in 1 week. And this couple had to travel like over 500 miles outside of their state to go and receive emergency abortive care. So we're not, they can't sell.
Women are not having
Right.
abortions after 16
Well,
weeks.
exactly. So they're getting themselves backed into the corner too with that, where women who know somebody that had a fetal demise. I know a woman who had a fetal demise at 32 weeks. I mean, it's horrible.
They seem
Yes.
to have forgotten that this is part of health care.
Yeah,
That
it is.
and
Yes,
that
exactly.
and unfortunately the naive debate about abortion up until
Mm-hmm.
recently hasn't emphasized that enough. And
Mhm.
this is the same thing
Mm-hmm.
about going
Yeah,
after, I always
mifepristone,
pronounce
yeah.
it wrong, mifepristone. You
Yes.
know, yes, it's an abortifacient, but it's also used for medical reasons and is much
Yep.
safer than the other medicine that's like it, which I can't remember. And so you're putting women's
Mm.
lives at risk in that way again. I mean, this is really what it's about. Without the right to an abortion, without Roe, it's about
Yes.
women suffering horribly
Mhm.
medically. And that's just basically it. And
Mental.
psychologically,
Yeah.
and the stuff with women having to give birth to
Mhm.
rapist kids and stuff. I mean, I never thought I'd live to see the day that rape and
Right.
incest would not be an
Right.
exception, but it's not in some of these states.
But when it's an exception, you're giving the game away, because then you're saying, well, if it's not your fault, if you just got
It's
pregnant
not
because
about
you were
life.
raped or
It's
there was
not about life.
an incident of incest, then it's not about, you being a slut or whatever. I mean, seriously, gives the game away. If you believe it's actually life, why would there be an exception for rape or incest? So,
True.
yeah,
Yep.
those
Yep.
exceptions, you're still trying to control women.
Well, and if this mifepristone case comes down, or if they issue their decision and it says, well, I mean, if it backs this judge in Louisiana,
Mhm.
then there's contraception. And so it's gone.
Oh yeah.
And using the Comstock Act, which prevents any abortion.
By mail, like
Yeah, if it
yeah.
prevents it from going across state lines. Well, it also
Mhm.
prevents all kinds of other stuff having to do with
Well, they're
from
going
going.
to use the Comstock Act. That's what I've heard. They're going to use it to keep
Mhm.
That's right.
from medical equipment from being transported. So therefore, if you're in Illinois and you're 30, we have a 16-week ban and you're in Illinois and you're 32 weeks pregnant and you have to have an
That's
emergency
right.
abortion to save your life,
Yep.
you will not be able to
I'm
get
up
that
in
medical
Illinois.
equipment.
So yeah, and I think a lot of women up here are just kind of, going about their lives, not really like, hey, it's not us, and yeah, it could be very easily be us.
Yeah.
So, I was gonna kind of end,
Well.
kind of go into kind of the ending topic. Just wanted to, talk about that soundbite from J6 defendant and former Trump attorney Sidney Powell spilling some Justice Alito tea, and then talk on the other side about it and how it potentially relates to Justice Alito and his likely role in the Supreme Court's decision this week to hear the immunity case, and how this decision plays into Project 2025.
Yes, we were filing a 12th Amendment constitutional challenge to the process that the Congress was about to use under the Electoral Act provisions that simply don't jive with the 12th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And Justice Alito was our circuit justice for that. Louis Gohmert was the plaintiff in our lawsuit. And we were suing the vice president to follow the 12th Amendment as opposed to the Electoral Count Act, or Electoral College Act. So that was the main point. And Nancy Pelosi had finagled to file an amicus brief in it. There'd been inside goings on in Congress whereby I believe it was Steve Scalise and McCarthy kept her from being an actual party. She wanted to work her way into the case as a party, but somehow politically that didn't happen. But so she got notice when we made our filing because she wanted to file an amicus brief, or had filed an amicus brief. And then, everything broke loose and she had to really speed up reconvening Congress to get the vote going before Justice Alito might have issued an injunction to stop it all, which is what should have happened.
Well, I think Sidney Powell's comments are just astounding. That there was actually this other mini plot, right? It's not just John Eastman and the fake electors and the storming of the Capitol, but that there was actually this plan
This
with
intricate plan.
yeah, with the Supreme Court justice to file some kind of something that would have stopped the counting of the Electoral College vote is just shocking. And it just shows you how we were hanging by a thread back in 2021. We were that close. And we should think about that when we think about what's coming up here in the near future. And and we can't rely on the courts necessarily, and we can't, it's scary. I mean, I don't know what to say.
It's really scary. Get out and vote, people. I mean, seriously, that's what we have to do. And we have to bring our friends and our family members, make sure they vote, make sure they're registered to vote, make sure they check and make sure those
Vote.org.
make sure they have they're still registered, because a lot of people are being dumped from the voter rolls. Try to do the postcards, whatever you can do, because this could be our last election if we don't do that.
That's the scary thing. And people really should check their voter registration.
Yeah.
Because a bunch of states have passed weird things in the last few years and are striking people from the rolls. That's definitely happened here where I am in Georgia.
What's shocking to me is that you have this woman who was just a complete and total believer, right? She didn't question what she was doing at all. And she thought that because of the 12th Amendment, that there was actually a path to the court that would delay this. I mean, and so it's all twisted up in their minds. And it's not just her, it's still the current election deniers. And the fact that you would, as I said, kind of twist yourself into a pretzel to get to this. Okay, well, we're going to do something. We're going to file this suit, and it's going to and a justice is going to have to take it up, and we're going to. And they believe they're going to save democracy, right? They think that they are saving democracy because the election has been stolen.
Do you think they believed it?
Yes, I think some of them absolutely believed it.
No, I just wonder about that, because I wonder if it's just a way of coping. They can't handle. I mean, they just couldn't handle losing, because it's kind of like Donald Trump's psychosis is like spread, right?
Well, the big lie, his big lie about the election certainly motivated a lot of people. I mean, look what happened in Brazil. Bolsonaro took exactly the same tactics, same election denying, and got the same result, right? With thousands of people storming the Brazil, Capitol buildings in Brasilia. You can motivate some people by lying and lying and lying and lying. I think, and it's unfortunate, and it's made people.
Well, the Nazis did it.
Yeah, absolutely, right? That's the big lie, right? Where it comes from.
I do think that a lot of these deniers actually believed it. I mean, you have the head of Heritage Foundation, the author of Project 2025, Kevin Roberts, refusing to say that Biden was legitimately elected. He says he's the president. I mean, this was as recently as 6 weeks ago.
But I just wonder if they talked themselves into believing that. I mean, because Donald Trump knew he lost. I mean, he knew he lost. That people have testified to that he admitted it. He said things that have, shown that he knew he lost. But I just, so I wonder if these people, because initially I don't think they believed it was stolen. And I think they've talked themselves into it because it's their way of coping, because they just can't handle these. And Donald Trump can't handle losing. I mean, he has he would just completely, if he admits these kind of things to himself, it's almost like he would completely break down. He would just, because apparently being called a loser is like the worst thing in the world in his family. So I just wonder if it just kind of like, if it's more that they actually believe it, or they just kind of talk themselves into it.
Well, I do think there's a certain defensive mechanism that was happening around this. Remember, Trump started all that Stop the Steal talk long before the 2020 election.
Yeah.
So he was setting himself up so that either he won the election and then he won, Or if he didn't win,
Yeah.
it was because it was stolen, right? There was no way for him to lose, in other words, in this situation. And so he spread this stuff all throughout the far right. Billionaires gave tons of money to election denial organizations to propagate this stuff. Social
Mhm.
media let it just rage on fire until January 6th. And that's how we got to the insurrection, right? But the stuff hasn't tamped down since then. That's the problem. I mean, Sidney Powell, here she is
Yes.
still talking about this stuff.
Yes.
She's been, I think, prosecuted in the Georgia case
He
of
pled
interference.
guilty.
Oh, remember
Yeah.
Roger Stone out there, he's on video saying, well, you know, even if they say
Yeah.
we lose, you know, we're just going to say we won.
Well, the real danger, I
Yeah.
think, is but all of this is dangerous. But even if you have somebody like, I do think that some of the people close to Trump, I mean, maybe they talk themselves into deeply believing it, but it's not even whether or not they believe it. But what's really dangerous is that they are able to make
Yes.
35 or 40% of the
Yes.
country believe it. And they do really believe it. And then from that flows, you know, more conspiracy theories, violence, disbelief in democracy. The fact that somebody that disagrees with you
Yes.
isn't just somebody that disagrees with you; they're an enemy.
Yes.
And so that's the trouble. Whether they believe it or not, or whether they are using it, I think there's some of both, but
Yeah, well, I think you're right, Wendy. I think it's the people at the top probably have found a way to talk themselves into it, you know. And this is like, as you were saying before, you know, that they, you know, this is how they keep getting elected. If they, you know, this is how they don't get primaried by some crazy MAGA person. But I think that what they see is they see a fertile field where they can sow the seeds, right? And that's what Trump did in the lead up to January 6th, where, you know, he starts talking about how the election's rigged and it's going to be stolen. He did that in 2015, you know, in the lead up to 2016. Exactly.
Remember, they did it to Obama. They did it to, he was the birther. I mean, they did it to Obama. Obama couldn't be, I mean, this is something, these people cannot deal with it. It's like they convince themselves that people that live in the city,
Yeah.
Black people, for some reason are not real Americans. That's why they always talk about Detroit or Philadelphia or Chicago or these cities, Atlanta, with the majority Black people. I mean, it's almost like they've convinced themselves that we are the real Americans, so therefore we cannot lose. These people's votes should not even count.
I think that's a really
Yes.
succinct description,
think-
Anita, because that's exactly what they've convinced them.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's of course what Jack Posobiec is saying, right?
Welcome to the end of democracy. We're here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6th, but we will endeavor to get rid of it and replace it with this right here, because all glory is not to government, all glory to God.
We need civil war. We need to overturn this democracy because we can't, if we can't win in these elections, rigged or not,
Right.
well, then we need another solution because we're the real Americans and those people aren't, and they should not be in charge.
Yeah.
That's right. That's why they couldn't accept Obama.
Yeah.
I mean, all those Black people coming out to vote for him. And they saw the writing on the wall because what has been was in the news, and it's continued to be in the news, the demographic changes. The white people are not going to be the majority of this country in 20, 35 years, right? And they kept hearing that. And I mean, they internalized it, and then this is how they react. They can't, and Obama was the spark. They said, oh my God, they just freaked these people out.
That's why we're in for a bumpy ride for a little bit, I think.
Yeah, but we are the majority.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
we are the majority. We have to remember that.
I'm going to pull us all out of the
Still.
MAGA mind because I don't want to be there. So like for like a nice little sorbet,
I know,
I'm thinking,
right?
so what I would like to know is because we've been so, you know, like we've been going between drinking full bottles of wine, watching Rachel Maddow, and then kind of moving in. Yes.
Okay.
Moving into that
At the same
area of,
time.
okay, I'm going to start like doing some self-care and maybe, you know, do some yoga and go get my nails done and stuff like that. And, you know, so we've all been kind of saying like, look, you have to exercise self-care, get in the fight, give it your all. If you need to step back, somebody else is going to pick up the charge for you. So with all of this important work, and you guys kind of have to do this, this is your job, right? What do you do for fun? What do you do to kind of do self-care and, to relax and like away from all
relax.
this? Is there anything?
Get away from all of this.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with a good bottle of wine.
I was going to say,
That's for damn
I might
sure.
go back. If Trump got back, I'm serious. I might try drugs. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think we're all going to be making some decisions then. But I got to tell you, I mean, maybe, I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with admitting it. But when, like, if Heidi and I are together and we are having some wine.
Us too.
Then, of course, we talk about this.
Yeah.
About.
Well, it's always on the top of mind, really, for us too. Yeah.
And you get some good ideas, but Netflix is okay.
I love Netflix.
Netflix is
no,
great.
not that.
Don't go to Handmaid's Tale. Don't watch that.
No, something unrelated.
Yes.
For me, it's swimming too. Just can't think when you're dying in the pool.
I mean,
I walk.
I wish we were like, oh yeah, we know how important this is. We do know how important it is. It's also, I mean, it's hard to tear yourself away.
I know.
I literally, I don't think I can do anything. I can't be at a family party. I can't go to like my dad and my stepmom and my sister and I, we have like these season tickets for a matinee at the opera, the Lyric Opera. And I'm getting into fights with people around me about politics. Like, I can't just shut it off. It's like, or like, the checkout girl at Target, are you registered to vote? Okay, you know how important this is?
You registered? Have you checked your voter registration?
Yeah.
You guys are a 2-woman get out the vote crew right here.
I do.
It's true.
Oh, I started a fight in the waiting room at the car wash. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the story real quick. I'll tell the short story. So I'm at the car wash and I'm listening to something stupid. It was before the 2020 election. And I go, I hope everybody in here is going to get out and vote. We have to turn this around. And it was some Latino people. And then there was this black woman. I was sitting next to a black woman. And then I just white lady drops throws the grenade and then walks out the door. And I'm outside. And the Latino woman comes out and she's just like all agitated. And she's like, I can't believe it. You wouldn't believe what she was saying. She was saying that she's glad this is the African-American woman. And she's telling this Latino woman and this man that she voted for Trump and she's glad that he's sending them back.
Oh.
And here I am, I'm standing there and I'm like looking and I'm like, oh my God, I am so sorry. Like I shouldn't, that was the time when I was like, do not make any kind of assumptions about anybody ever, because I was saying, I'm like,
you felt safe to say that there.
I felt safe to say that, and you know what? It really speaks to the whiteness, the whiteness, and how we carry ourselves, in the throughout our cities and towns.
Yeah, the white privilege.
And we have our conversations where it was like, I was just like, oh, sure, they're with me. It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was kind of a moment where I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I need to slow my roll a little bit, maybe.
Don't forget, we also do the Nazi part. And so, I mean, not that you were in that situation, but it is taught us to cast your eyes around.
Yes.
And make sure.
Yes.
That you're, these are volatile times, and it can, regardless of that situation. And of course, everybody is entitled to their opinions. It's unfortunate that she would be so hate people right to their face.
Yes.
But I mean, this is a time when the volatility is going to lead to something.
Yeah.
We are going to have hope. And
absolutely.
It takes, or how many different incidents are, that is yet to be determined, but we are going to have it. And I would never want fear to stop somebody from encouraging others to vote, to register, to do all of that. But we do have to exercise some caution, and
Yeah.
so that's just
Well, during Obama, I remember I was telling Karen how you couldn't have a Obama sign or an Obama sticker on your car here in Texas,
Yeah.
or even having a Biden sign in a yard. My husband was nervous about it. A Beto. We had a Beto sign out there too, and our neighbor stopped talking to us after that too. So I mean, it's just what it is.
during Biden in my neighborhood, during Obama, we had Obama signs in the front yard. People took them. We put a new one out. But what's interesting is, but when it comes to people participating in the democratic process and saying, who you're going to vote for or supporting a candidate is obviously a part of that. But in my neighborhood, the first go round, there were Trump signs every other house. The second go round, no Trump signs.
Really?
Not so much. How about now?
There's people are probably still voting for him, or maybe some of them didn't, but they're not quite so as proud of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing. He's an adjudicated rapist. So yeah.
I've heard that from other people too. So I feel like that is a good sign. Well, listen, ladies, on that note, I think that we are going to let you go and get back to the important work that you're doing. And
Yes.
So we are going to post globalextremism.org. So people can go to your website and check out all of the good work that you're doing. And then where can people find you on social media?
At Wendy Vi, at Heidi Beirich, at Global Extremism on Twitter. We're all on LinkedIn too.
Okay.
So, as Twitter descends into the problematic place that it is, we've ramped up the LinkedIn posting.
Branched out there.
Yeah.
Are you on Threads?
Not yet. We have to make some decisions about where we're going to jump to, but we'll figure it out soon.
Yeah.
We also have a newsletter, I should have said, you can sign up for on our website.
Oh,
And
great.
that'll that keep you up to date with the work that we do. We do a roundup of stuff on the far right, news articles and opinion pieces and things like that every week too. So if people are interested in that, please sign up.
Oh, that is wonderful. And I did notice that there was a donate button as well to help. So everybody out there, let's get out there
Yes,
and
thank you.
and donate.
Bring that up.
Yes.
Please do that because they have an important cause.
Yes.
They really, and thank you for coming here and helping us.
We really
spread this
appreciate
message.
it. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, y'all keep up this good work, right?
Yeah.
Keep it up. Y'all you have a voice, you have a
Thank you.
way to get it out there. And so we appreciate you doing it.
Thank you. Viva la resistance. We're going to do this.
That's right.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye.